And looks like we're live. Welcome to another exciting episode of Echo Radio. We're back once again with another week of new and exciting information about Final Fantasy XIV Heavensward. Except that there isn't much to talk about in terms of hard news. Sorry guys, it's the fact of things. Information gets released at a certain rate, we receive information at a certain rate, I pass information on to you at a certain rate. Yeah, sometimes those just don't line up. Regardless, welcome. And we do have what we hope is an interesting show for you. I'm Mascurse, and I'm excited to welcome back once again Shiv. Or Shiv, rather.
Hey
I guess I can't really consider him a guest at all anymore, because at this point, I believe we can safely make the announcement that I'm excited to say that Shiv is now Echo Radio's own Shiv. Whether he likes that or not, we'll have to see in the end. But
Yeah, that'll be good.
anyway, super happy to be here and super happy to have you here, Shiv. I'm looking forward to making a fun show. So, let's start off with
Looking forward to it.
some grievance news here. How about you lead us off here, Shiv?
All right. There isn't a whole lot to talk about. We do have our third airship, so good job on that. The
Woo!
Black Waltz joins the ranks of the Blackjack and the Ragnarok as the foremost exploratory vessels for Grievance. We're really looking forward to the content that's brought with 3.1. From everything they're talking about, it's going to be a lot of fun. So, looking forward to that. Rating. We now have two teams that have cleared Alexander Savage Floor 1. Congrats to the Weekend Warriors on their first clear a couple weeks ago. Their teams are slowly working towards it. Looking forward to see the other four finally get through it and push more progression. And when they say it's Savage, they're not kidding.
Yeah, they're really not kidding. It's tough stuff, man. The DPS checks are brutal. So I'm looking forward to seeing more of the clears coming soon, though, because everybody is starting to get real close. Yep. Um,
That's kind of it for the new Grievance news.
yeah, I mean,
Oh, no, there's one thing. Sunday, Fox is holding an event, and we all
oh
know what
right.
Fox is. He's going to do a hide and seek event, I believe. He's kind of announced it tonight in game, so pass it on your friends. Sunday is going to be a fun time.
Indeed, indeed. I enjoy those events immensely. So if you have the time and availability, you should definitely show up. All right.
And I'll pass it back on.
Indeed, but give me just a second here. All right, we're good. Uh, anyway, so like I said, there's not that much in terms of Final Fantasy news released by Square Enix. There was a hot fix this week, just a couple of quality of life improvements, fixes to minor bugs, things like that. Um, we do have some upcoming news from the Tokyo Game Show. It's going to be coming here in a couple of weeks, but until then, we're kind of stuck with what we've got. Oh, good grief. Okay. Anyway, we've got instead, however, since news does tend to come out on approximately a monthly basis, we're going to split up our shows in such a manner that we have our on weeks we have the Square Enix news, and our off weeks we have just our regular topics. Topics of discussion including things regarding rating, and somebody is messing with my internet. What the heck? Who did that? Shiv, are you doing that?
I'm not doing anything. How can I affect your internet?
There are too many ways. Oh boy. All right, looks like it's clearing up. I do apologize for that. Somebody must have been downloading something on my network. I'm gonna have to yell at them later. Anyway, so instead of talking about news this week, we've got a topic of discussion. So, let's get right into that. But before we get into that, I do have a necessary disclaimer here, and that is that the views and opinions expressed here on this show are those of the hosts themselves and are not a reflection of the views of the Echo Radio Newscast, the Grievance Total Gaming Network, or Grievance Global Gaming LLC. So there, that's been placed out there now. Nobody can sue us or anything. So anyway, this week's topic we have raid composition and role fulfillment. So, a major part of the endgame of Final Fantasy XIV and many other similar MMORPGs is the endgame. Talking about things like our things like your tank roles, your DPS roles, and your healer roles. That's all well and good, but there's also the mentality of each individual class within the roles and what roles need to be filled within a particular raid team to be able to make it successful. Now, some parts of this have to do with what players are on your team, but there are still some core roles that need to be filled in any raid team. And we're not talking your classics, your tank, your healer, your DPS. That's all going to be there anyway. You're going to have to balance that no matter what, but the game usually does a lot of that for you. But there are very specific character roles that need to be filled. So, let's talk about that for a while. Let's start out with some of the primary tank roles. And Shiv, I think since you're a primary tank, it might be a good idea for you to start with that a little bit there.
I'll take over. Yep, I'll take over. Tank roles, seeing as I made a tank. We got a bunch of different type of roles when it comes to raiding. You got your defender tank. They're the ones that have big cooldowns. They take the major hits. They just basically take a beating and hold threat. Coupled with that, there's threat control. The main job of the main tank is to hold the boss. It needs to make sure the boss isn't doing things he's not supposed to be doing. Like turning around and smacking the rest of the group in the face for the healers because of threat. There's also your self-healing and self-buffing tanks, which in this game pretty much goes to warrior. For defender, I'd say that'd be paladin. Threat controls all three, both warrior, paladin, and dark knight. Your self-healing and self-buffing, warriors can do a lot of extra stuff to bring up their DPS and mitigation. And you have evasion tanks, which aren't in the game yet. I can see them possibly add an evasion tank, but they get really dicey to play. Uh, Games tend to have problems with evasion tanks. And then, of course, your tanks also still need to do DPS. Anybody who's in Savage realizes that your tanks have to also help burn things down and help meet these DPS checks. So, I mean, currently, I believe the standings are Warrior is still rocking the DPS. Dark Knights are behind them, and then Paladins. Paladins need a little bit of love this patch. There's some issues. It seems like back in the coil, it was all physical, so Paladins were great. The Alexander stuff is all magic. So Dark Knights are the kings in there because we can uh, up our magic mitigation by quite a bit, and it's really makes some of those fights not as difficult.
Indeed, indeed. Speaking a little bit about that, because like you mentioned, I don't think there are really any tanks in any game that fulfill just a single role. What do you have to say about secondary tank roles?
Usually your off tank is either picking up ads or dealing with a mechanic that your other classes can't do. Typically, let's use Alexander Savage as an example. I off tank for the oppressor. So when the ads come out, I'll just do a AOE attack and they'll come at me, but the DPS is the ones that are still burning them down. So I'm the one who's taking all the beating, and there's less healing going out. So that's something that we work on.
Right.
And typically the off tank is there to improve damage and stance, being able to jump in and out of their DPS stance in their evasion or threat generation stances, which adds a little bit to it because there wasn't as much stancing in Coil. I mean, Warriors
Right.
didn't have a stance; they do now. Paladins didn't really off tank too much in Coil.
Right. Yeah, I do remember the days when coil was a thing. Generally, you would have your paladin main tank, your warrior off tank, and then the only time the warrior would ever actually do much tanking is when there were a lot of adds to consider, or when the boss would do a split, like in the first coil, um, till you got up
Right.
to like final coil, really. Um, so let's talk a little bit about secondary roles on each individual tank now, because while there are secondary roles to fill both as a main tank and as an off tank, each individual tank class tends to have more than just one thing that they can do, or one thing they're really good at, and then one thing that they also bring to the table. Especially since there aren't that many games that have a vast variety of tanks. Most of them have just a few tanks that can fulfill, you know, significantly different roles within the game. Um, so, for example, in Final Fantasy XIV, let's just talk Paladin right off the bat. Um, Paladin is obviously a defender. That's their main role.
Okay.
That's what they do. They bring to the table high defense, high damage mitigation, things like that. But they also bring a couple of other things. They bring threat control in their flash abilities and Rage
Mhm.
of Halon and things like that. Um, which I'd say that's probably their main secondary role is in threat control because
Right. They've
it's
also
it's very difficult to pull off of a paladin.
right. They also with the release of Heaven's Word add got a couple more tools for their kits. There's a
Yeah.
Royal Authority, and then uh, the I can't even think of the name of it. The one where they if they get hit, everybody gets a shield, or if they get healed, everybody gets a shield, which is a
Oh,
really nice skill.
Divine Veil.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, and while those are more utility, um, I would even call it something along the lines of self buffing or self healing.
Yeah,
Um,
true.
but it still brings to the table a lot of threat control in that form because that's a heal ability, which, as we all know, is high threat. So anyway, paladins are primary defenders with a secondary role of threat control. That's what I would say. Let's switch over and look at warriors now. The primary role that warrior brings to the table, as far as I'm concerned, is their high damage.
Oh
That
yeah.
that's what defines them as a tank job. That's what people bring them on raid teams for, is for their high damage as a tank. Um, However, they still also bring a few other things to the table, primarily in their self healing and self buffing. They are extremely good at staying alive because of the fact that they have an excellent self heal and they can buff their own defensive qualities, their HP pool. They buff their own
Oh
HP
yeah.
pool, and they can debuff the boss, giving everybody that has slashing weapons more damage, including themselves. As well as they've got things like Inner Beast, Wrath stacks, all sorts of things to consider in that regard. So yeah, um, those are the primary things that Warrior brings to the table. Now,
Yeah.
Dark Knight, I can't say I'm super familiar with. I haven't had enough time to really be high on that particular mark, but I would say that the primary thing that they bring to the table probably is their defender status. Is that not correct?
They defender. They're also self healing and self buffing. We have a couple tools that we can use to heal ourselves. But it's some RNG based, which is all the Heaven's War classes. There's some RNG
Right,
attached to it.
right.
Um, and definitely threat control. I actually think that we have better AoE threat control than a warrior.
Okay. So would you say that they're
That's just my opinion, but
right? Would you say that they're more of a threat control class than a defender class?
yeah. But the thing is the Dark Knight has so many skills, interesting skills. They fill lots of roles because
I see.
yeah, I mean I main tank Faust in A1 Savage, and I pull Faust and all the ads, and our off tank just DPSs the entire time, so I'm able to
Right.
maintain that.
Okay. So they bring a lot of things to the table then. That's interesting.
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
I mean, there are tons of tanks in other games that fulfill a lot of these roles, but you'll never see, as far as I'm aware, you'll never see a tank that fills just one role. Is the main thing that I wanted to get at there. Um,
Yeah.
so like for example, I come from SWTOR, Star Wars: The Old Republic, and the only tank class that I really played there was Vanguard. And while they did not bring very high damage to the field, they brought superb defender status. It was very hard to kill a Vanguard, and it was also very easy to threat control as a Vanguard. On the flip side, you had the assassin tanks, which were super popular, which were evasion tanks, but they were also self healing slash self buffing. At least at first, they changed that later. But that was how they tanked. So there's tons of possibilities out there. Who knows what they're going to bring in the future? Thoughts for the future?
Yeah.
So
I'm not sure.
yeah, we'll have to see. We'll have to see. So tanks aren't the only thing that's important to a raid, guys. As much as some people may try to convince you otherwise. We also have two other major roles. Uh-oh. What the heck? Now it's screwing with my dang screen. This is just unacceptable. What the heck? Give me just a second, guys. I don't know what the heck just happened. That was beyond stupid. Anyway, um, so there is also this role that I like to call healing. I tend to think that's kind of important because no matter how good of a tank you are, it's not going to matter if you die. So,
Dying's not so bad.
well, you can't really tank if you're dead. Swear to
Yeah,
God,
that's true.
Brennan. So there are several healer roles as well as your tank roles that we talked about before. So let's go ahead and go into the healer roles a little bit here. The first one that I have listed here, we have the burst or triage healer. Your triage healers are going to be high healing output with few abilities being used. These are the healers that are going to generate a lot of healing over a short period of time, but they're not going to have to focus on it. They're generally going to have cast timers. These are the healers that you need if you've got big spiky damage incoming. So those are the things you want to consider there. You've got your damage prevention healers. These healers are primarily going to be there for the purpose of stopping damage before it actually reaches the person that it's intended to hit. Um,
Yeah.
Using shields,
Which I think is
using
actually a harder.
yeah, you have to be a lot more proactive with your healing. You can't just react to damage
Yeah.
coming in.
Yeah, you really have to know the fight.
Yeah, yeah, or you have to know your role very well. Either one of those works very well. But you can't react. You have to move ahead of things and get on top of things. All
Right.
right, then the third one is the AoE healer. You've got your healers that don't focus on hitting a single target with their heals. Instead, they have strong area effect heals that can target multiple people within the party or an area on the ground. You've got your healing over time healers, which put on abilities that continue to heal the target while they do other things such as healing other targets. And finally, you've got your buffs and damage role. Now, generally, that's not going to be a primary role for healers, but it can be. Um, these healers focus instead of just straight up uh, replenishing HP pools, they also create offensive or defensive buffs, and they can deal significant damage to enemy units. So, just going into things a little bit because these are the primary roles, like I said before. But it's pretty rare that you only have one healer in a party. So, Shiv, what do you think about pairings here? Some of these that go good together in terms of having one healer do one thing and one healer do another.
That's typically where most of the Rangers are doing it. The old meta was obviously White Mage and Scholar. Um, Now it's White Mage slash Astrogen slash Scholar, and I believe they can all not interchangeable, so they all bring something different to the table. The White Mage is your good burst, your burst healer. That's what they do is they put out big heals and AoE heals at the same time. They do have a hot. I mean, regen's good, and everybody loves it, and especially running dungeons because you can go on autopilot. Your scholar definitely damage prevention. They're all about the shields,
Yeah.
which I think makes scholar a little harder to play because you definitely have to know the fight. They do have, I mean, they do have a little bit of AOE with uh, oh man, brain fart. Their AOE shield. Don't think
Oh,
they have regens,
Sucker.
do they?
No, they don't have regens at all. That's one
Yeah,
thing they
sucker.
do not bring to the table. They have Sucker for
Yeah,
AoE healing, and they also now have Indomitability. So Sucker and Indomitability for their AoE healing. Um, they also bring a significant amount of damage and buffs to the table.
yeah. And then Astrologian, which they definitely bring buffs.
Oh
Their
yeah,
whole card system is based around buffs. Not so bursty. They got some fixes with the last patch, which helped them a little bit.
yeah,
And then again, it also depends on which stance they're in. If they're in diurnal, then they're all about hots, and nocturnal is all about shields. So
yeah,
that takes some interesting some things to get used to.
yeah. They're also very
That
mobile.
said, yes, the I think the current meta right now, I mean, if everybody just goes by world first, it's all about the white mage and the scholar, and I just think
Right.
that's because not everybody is comfortable with the astrologian. Um, and that being said, the current meta for tanks is Dark Knight and Warrior.
Right.
But being able to be flexible is always a good thing.
Exactly. Yep, that's absolutely true. Speaking from, I believe I may be a main DPS now, but when I first joined Final Fantasy XIV and other games, I was a primary healer. And for me, I prefer being that damage prevention healer, that bubble healer. I played Scholar in Final Fantasy XIV. I played Sage uh, in SWOTOR. I played a Minstrel in Lotro. All sorts of things like that. Um, but every healer, once again, just like tanks, every healer fulfills more than one role. So while we talked about this in terms of the Final Fantasy XIV healers, um, generally some healer roles just tend to be picked up on the same character. For example, if you talk about the burst healer, oftentimes you're going to see that coupled with AoE heals or buffs and damage. Um, because those healers are particularly well suited to being able to do AoE heals in addition to their burst heals. Your damage prevention healers tend to be very well suited for having healing over time or having buffs and damage being put out to the party at the same time. Um, your AoE healers are often able to put out heal over time effects, whether that be in ground effects or as in the White Mage. Well, actually, the White Mage has that now as well. They have a ground effect heal over
Yes, they do.
time, and they also have a Medica 2, which is an AoE heal over time. So
Right.
that's something to
High
consider there.
threat on that one.
Oh yeah, super high threat. And AoE healers are also good at burst or triage healing generally, because they can fill in that role when somebody is in trouble and toss out an AoE heal instead of just a single target heal on the tank. Heal
Right.
over time healers, when they focus on that, tend to be very good at providing things like damage prevention. Um, Usually it's going to be in terms of passive effects or effects on their heal over time, buffs, things like that. But I have noticed a lot of healers that focus on heal over time effects um, are very commonly going to be your damage prevention um, as a
Yeah.
secondary role, or it could be AoE. Uh, as an example, you've got the Sage from SWOTOR. While it was a heal over time healer, it also has serious AoE healing and it had a very good uh, damage prevention. So these are all things, like I said, never going to see one thing. Never going to see just one thing. Otherwise,
Right.
it becomes just too one-sided, and that healer becomes not flexible enough to really participate in the raid. All right, there's one more role uh, that's kind of required for raiding, and
Yeah.
If you want to actually complete the raid, you kind of have to kill the thing that you're trying to kill. Generally, it's
Yeah.
so you got to have your DPS. You got to have your damage dealers, DDs, deeps, whatever you want to call them. But no,
My deeps.
no, the only job of a DPS, it's not just to deal damage. It's not, guys. Don't get trapped in that don't get trapped in that mentality. It may be the primary job of the DPS, but it is not the only job in any way, shape, or form. So, that being
Yes, your
said,
job is to stay alive.
yeah. Um, so that being said, let's talk about some of the primary roles that DPS can fulfill while still dealing damage.
Off the top of my head, we got like the burst damage. These are the ones
Right,
who put out consistently good front-loaded attacks. That's what they do is they just burst and they tear things up.
right.
Usually your casters, melee is definitely burst. Ninjas and monks, the
I
black
would
mages.
I would disagree that ninjas and monks are burst damage.
Burst?
Ninjas maybe, but monks I would definitely call that consistent damage.
Yeah, that's true. Okay. You got your damage over time, which is usually the class I enjoy playing as DPS. I always played with like dot classes uh, ever since I started back in EverQuest 1 as a druid. Typically, we're currently the only one that really fills that role in Final Fantasy is the summoner. Bards, I mean, every class has a dot, but summoners are all about the dots
Right.
and passing them around. Then we have what Miles referred to for consistent damage. Um, yeah, and I can see where monks would be that. Black
Yeah.
mage is about front loading in the Enochian,
And
and
dragoons.
then
Dragoons build up to that huge burst and then they let off the
yes,
burst.
and then open up a can of whoop-ups.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
you got your consistent damage, which is good. And then we get to stuff that Final Fantasy doesn't. They do a little bit. You get your debuffers, um, which the next ones are kind of all in the same thing. I consider you get your debuffs. You have the ability to make the boss hit not as hard. Usually secondary roles. They're not usually primary roles. Definitely not in Final Fantasy. We don't have any primary debuffing classes.
Yeah.
You got your support classes. Um, and actually, I'm going to let you speak on the support.
Yeah. Support is like I said, once it's just like debuffers, it's usually a secondary role for a DPS, at least in this game. There are some games though where support is a primary feature of a DPS. For example, you move over into Rift, for example, and
Oh yeah,
that becomes a huge important thing there.
oh yeah, yeah. Support is a big thing.
Yeah. Um,
And it used to be even bigger.
right.
EverQuest support was
Yeah.
mandatory.
Yeah.
Uh, CC, which is not used at all in this game at all.
Right. Yeah.
There is some, but it's not ever touched.
Yeah. Well, there's no reason to because they've designed the fights in such a manner that it's not required. You go back into the
True.
days of WoW, like for example, the fight that everybody knows as Leroy Jenkins. That fight requires huge amounts of crowd control in order to be, or fights within that, I should say, not that fight itself, but different fights in that particular raid required huge amounts of crowd control to be able to really perform in. But this game, the fights really aren't built that way, with I think one significant exception, and that's turn 7.
Yeah, and that's only because of the mechanic that you
Yeah,
had to do crowd control as you died.
yeah, and even that's not really crowd control. That's just single target control. You know what I mean?
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Well, it's
So
single target control until the boss actually freezes it. So the boss is
yeah,
actually
fair
doing
enough.
crowd control for you.
Fair enough. Fair enough. And then you don't have to worry about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then beyond that, you also have your mobile DPS. Now, once again, this is usually a secondary role. Sometimes it can be considered the defining feature of a class. For example, pre 3.0 bards were a mobile DPS.
Oh
So
yeah.
that was the defining feature of that class. Um, at least as far as a lot of people are concerned. I kind of saw them as a primary support DPS, but that may have just been because there weren't any in the game. um, yeah, but that
Actually, machinist is the only mobile class now.
Yeah, and even they have only relative mobility. There's not very
Right.
much mobility in terms of DPS. That being said, bards and machinists have more than a lot of classes because of the fact that they can switch off their thing that makes them stand still and move and still DPS. Um, you try
Right.
to do that you can do it for a short amount of time on a summoner. Black mage, good luck. That's not going to happen. As a melee, it's very rare as a melee is going to be able to really be mobile, um, simply because they have to be in close to really deal their damage. I think the only
Right.
exception that I can think of off the top of my head that was a melee class that could still be mobile was the Vanguard class in Star Wars: The Old Republic. While that was a melee class, most of their skills were melee. They still had pretty significant mid-range damage dealing skills and spells that could continue to work while they moved around. So it's rare, but it does happen. So I would go into the whole secondary role thing with DPS, but let's be honest, guys. There's a million possible combinations.
Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah,
And then it
it's
also depends on your raid makeup on what
yeah,
you're going to be doing.
exactly. And what's given to you in the game, whether that be what classes are available to you or what the raid content calls for. Um, yeah, there's no way to predict exactly what any one class is going to bring to the field. Uh, I mean, you could try to define the classes in Final Fantasy XIV all day, and while you probably be able to define a primary role for each of them, they bring multiple secondary roles to the table, and
Right.
there's really no way to narrow it down to just one or two for any DPS. So, um, yeah, like I said, there are a ton of axes and things to consider when you're having to balance DPS, which is why many people just ignore it altogether until you get into games where it becomes absolutely necessary. In this game, the DPS is all relatively balanced as it is, so really the only thing you have to consider is you don't want too many melee because then you won't have space to spread out around the boss. You don't want too many of your support DPS like Bard or Machinist because then you'll end up losing damage. You don't want to have classes that use up the same stat or take the same gear as much as possible. For example, bards slash machinists slash ninjas. You want to be careful having more than one of those in the party because you're gonna lose limit break status a little bit easier. Um, these are things to consider, but in this game they're not that important because most of the DPS classes are pretty well balanced. Let's be honest. There's still
Yeah.
tweaking that needs to occur, but that's always going to be the case. Go to games like WoW,
Definitely.
SWTOR, Lotro, any game that I can think of off the top of my head, any other game besides this one, and you're going to have quote unquote best compositions. Whether that changes from month to month or not depends on the game, but you know, best compositions are best compositions are best compositions in these games. You know, oh, I'm in a WoW rating group and I don't have. I wait. You saying you don't have a hunter? Well, you guys must be crazy. You see what I'm saying? Um, so these are things to not be so concerned about in Final Fantasy XIV. The roles can all be fulfilled, but it should be noted that it's important to fill all the roles.
Well, also to clear up your point, I think a lot of people look at what the top guilds do and think that's the only way to do things. A lot of people really have problems thinking outside the box.
Right, right. You got to be careful because people are going to do things a certain way because they may perceive it as the fastest way to do it. And for those
Right.
people, more power to you. That's cool. You can pull that off. That's cool. From my perspective, it's more important to balance the team based around things like what you want to compose your team of, what's going to work with the strategies that you want to do. So,
Right.
um, and speaking of the balancing thing, um, a lot of that falls under a few specific jobs within the raid mentality society, whatever you want to call it. Um, maybe Shiv can speak to that a little bit better than I can.
Uh, yeah, putting together teams is always a fun thing. Because you have to look at there's just so much to look at. It's not always about the classes people are bringing. It's also matching personalities. There's a lot to be said about a synergy that develops between a group that plays together all the time. Um, I mean, just for Final Fantasy alone, we have each raid team has its own distinct personality. So if when we lose members, I have to try and find people who would fit into that team. So I kind of get an idea of how each team runs, and I know that I can't put this person on this team because they joke around too much, or this team jokes around too much. This person's very serious. It's one of those. So I also have to know how all the classes interact and play together. So I'm not going to try and stick two white mages on a team. I want to. The goal is to have 8 distinctly different classes. Doesn't
Right.
always work, but that's the best, especially because having multiple class will give your limit break.
Right.
So that's what we do. That's my job is to look at everybody we have and see what I can do to get them on the teams, and then I'll talk to my raid lieutenants, and they're the ones who actually run each of the individual statics. I mean, I obviously don't run 6 teams. There's no way. I mean, I'm busy and I'm just taking care of mine. Um, and the raid lieutenants will come to me and let me know what roles they need. Specifically, I need a white mage. I need an astrologian who's really good.
Yeah.
I need a summoner who's on a multi dot. And then also the personality thing. Like I said, we've got to make sure that we're not putting conflicting personalities because Grievance is great, but we're not. Not everybody gets along. And then especially in a raid environment where tensions can get really high.
That's
You know,
that's absolutely true. And being in a raid team myself, not any leadership position, thank God, but um, as much as I respect you guys that do the raid leading and the raid lieutenant positions and things like that, I've done that. I did that in SWOTOR. I was a raid leader,
yeah,
and I'm done. I've served my time, guys. I'm not doing that again. uh, that is so much more work than just being good at your one role. Sometimes you
yeah,
fulfill more than one role. For example, I like to think of myself as the guy that always does the research before a fight, and I'm able to bring some points forward every so often that may be salient, maybe something that people didn't realize. Or on the flip side, it might be I just need to crack that laugh and break up the tension every so often. Um,
right.
I like to see myself in that position. Whether or not that's actually what everybody else sees me at is another question entirely. But
About that.
hey, I know the jokes don't have to be funny, man.
Yeah. Nah.
But sometimes a
Um,
well-placed laugh is exactly what the team needs to break up the
the
seriousness,
stress.
break up the tension. Because yeah, raiding is super intense. Raiding requires a lot of concentration, and that can cause people to get, sometimes legitimately, sometimes not legitimately upset when something doesn't go quite right.
Oh, I mean, you think about it. The most fights, I mean, the fights are lengthy. So we're to get 8 people to dance perfectly for
Hmm.
13 minutes and stay synchronized is it's tough to do.
Oh yeah.
So the groups who are clearing stuff, I mean, major props. And the great thing about it is when everything lines up, you get these really great teams that work well together. They think outside the box. They help each other. Um, the raid lieutenants keep everybody focused, which is a great thing. So organization, and I think the way we're doing it has really led to the success that we've seen with our groups.
Yeah.
Um, and then for the people who aren't in a raid lieutenant position or aren't in a position of leadership, the only thing I ask that you do is know your role.
Yeah.
you know, be good at it. Spend the time. We got targeting dummies all over the place. Spend time, nail that rotation so you can do it in your sleep.
I
Know
spent
that if
so
I have
many
to
hours.
move, you did, and it shows. Um, you know, it's not just about doing DPS. It's also about knowing the mechanics of a fight. It's knowing, okay, I'm getting ready to go into a burst phase, so I'm going to save um, this skill so I can, unleash the Hounds of Hell when it pops, and we're just going to keep back to burning the boss. It's, you know, and mechanics, that's usually the hard part. Most groups get in
Yeah.
there, their DPS is low because they don't know the mechanics, and then groups tend to. I've seen groups will look at it, well, your DPS is low, but you know, it's a learning process, and once you get to the point where everybody knows the fight, DPS just naturally rises. Gear helps too, but usually once the mechanics are known and are well, you know the dance, then it's knowing how to get your rotation to fit into that dance,
Yeah.
and that's when things really come together.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, the dance is important, but there's also a few other things to consider when it comes to knowing your role. Because, yeah, you may be a DPS. Your job may be to do DPS and not die to mechanics. But there's also other things to consider. For example, you're playing a bard. What's the time that you want to play Mage's Ballad, and what's the time that you want to play Foe's Requiem? Um,
Right.
you're playing a summoner. Do I need to be the guy that's first on reses? Do I need to consider that? Do I need to save my swift cast for that? Do
Do
I
I use
need?
an eye for an eye,
Yeah,
or is the other
exactly.
person using it?
Exactly. Yeah. Don't stack up your eye for an eye, because that's a waste of an ability. When to use virus? Oh man, when to use virus?
Yeah.
I'm speaking this because I know I play primary summoner. There are tons of abilities that other classes bring. Black mages with their apocastasis. Um, your uh, your dragoons with the slow effects, your bards with the songs, your machinists with the TP regeneration and things like that, ninjas
And
with
the
their
bishop.
goad and their threat controls, um, trick attack, whatever you want to call it. These are all parts of
Yeah.
the knowing your role, because it's not just knowing your class; it's knowing your role within the party as well. Uh, but yeah, if you know all that, I mean, that the first thing that's going to happen is your raid lieutenant is going to be super happy because now they don't have to do that for you.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah, but what I mean, guys, raiding is fun. Don't get me wrong.
Oh,
Raiding is the
it's a blast.
yeah, raiding is the thing that draws me to this game, the thing that keeps me here, the thing that sticks it to me because yeah, it's freaking hard, guys. But I enjoy every minute of it because I'm with a group of people that understand me, that I understand them. The roles are well defined. Everybody knows what they're doing most of the time. Sorry.
That and after wiping to a boss for 20 hours and finally getting the mechanics when that boss finally hits the ground, the
Oh
rush of
yeah.
euphoria is like a drug.
Oh man. I don't know if you guys have ever heard World First Guilds clearing a fight for the first time. They are justifiably screaming. I'm sorry, guys.
Yeah,
It's
I
super
listened to
exciting.
the Elysium A4S
Oh
kill.
man.
They recorded and you could just hear the relief in their voices.
Oh yeah.
But no, that was an awesome fight.
Yeah, not just the relief, but the super high excitement levels too. Uh, up,
Oh
you
yeah,
can feel it building up through when they're about to clear it. One of my favorites is the original turn 5 clear from Blue Garter. Um, you can just hear it. It's like, don't give up, don't give up, don't give up. It's not over. It's right there. It's right there. Building up to the end. Everybody's, you could tell it. Everybody's on the edge of their seats. Everybody's tensing up.
yeah,
You gotta get it just right. If you screw up, it could still be over. And then it hits the ground, and everything just came together. It's like you just succeeded at a lifelong goal. I'm talking about this because I've felt that rush. A Shiv's felt that
mm,
rush. Every Raider's
oh
felt
yeah,
that rush. Um, I highly encourage anybody that is willing to put in the time. Learn how to raid. Learn your class well enough to do it, and then get in there and do it.
definitely.
It's worth your time, guys. It's worth your time. Anyway, um, unless you've got anything else to add, Shiv, we're coming up pretty much on the end of what we've got to talk about today. Um,
No,
yeah, like I said,
I've got nothing.
yeah, no real news from Square Enix, guys. But coming up in a couple of weeks, I can't remember whether it's next week or the week after. I think it's the week after. Tokyo Game Show is going to have a live letter, and we will have some from that hopefully that we'll be able to share with you. Um, there may be a slight delay. I don't know whether the schedule is going to stick or not. But before the next show, I've got to figure out what's going on with that stupid internet drop that keeps happening. I may need to get a different producer and then I just host the show. We'll have to wait and see, but I want to produce the best thing that I can for everybody, and I want everybody to be able to enjoy it without all these stupid stops and hitches and lags. Um,
Yeah.
so the better that we can do in that regard, the happier I'll be at least. I don't know about the rest of you,
Tokyo
but
Game Show is the 19th, by the way, so next
it is the
Saturday.
night. Awesome. So on the next show, we should have news for you guys. Hopefully, there will be something interesting because we're all looking forward to 3.1, and they've kept everything pretty close to their chests. So
Yeah, they normally do.
yeah. Anyway, um, so we've come to the end of it. I'm gonna go ahead and let's say we're gonna sign off here. I'm Mascurse, and I've been joined
And
by
I'm
Shiv.
Shiv.
Yeah, you are Shiv. Have a good night. Stay safe.